Hi, this is Sharina Joshi, and I'm back to lecture you on Edward Kamau Brathwaite on his poetry as part of MA English elective IGNU, New Literatures in English, the Caribbean section, MEG 8, Block 6. And now if you look at just this particular slide, you will notice the kind of books, the kind of cover pages that he's coming out, and we're going to look forward into his new poetry after what we had seen in the first volume of poetry that he had written. So I'm asking you to look back and look ahead. So looking back, we look at Brathwaite's poetry, looking back to the submerged history and language of slaves and migrants and laborers. And he recovers it, submerged as it is in the middle passage of the sea. The language which is getting submerged in a world dominated by colonial masters. And it is that he will recover, that he will seek out as a new aesthetic and a new language. What he calls nation language, Creole and Patois. Rhythms that he looks at are the spoken speech of the streets, of talking drums, of jazz, of calypso, of reggae. It's very significant, this whole point about spoken speech. Now you would say, how can poetry be spoken speech? But there is something extremely important, and we will talk about it a little later. I would advise you to go to YouTube and hear his poetry recited by him. He gives, through the rhythms, an identity and a voice to a people and a land and a history. And it is not just to the people who are marginalized. It is the entire experience of the Caribbean world. The intricacies of Caribbean culture, but more the intricacies of the experience of the Caribbean. As he would say in one of his lectures, that you see the sunlight, and you see the sunlight moving in your room and then moving on the waters. It is not like the sun in England. It is typically Caribbean. And therefore, the rhythms that he has, the nation language that he speaks of, links it to folk culture, subculture, and counterculture. We've seen it in the last lecture that it is manifested in figures like Anansi, the storyteller, the god of wisdom, the god who knows all stories in the world and will continue to actually inspire future generations also. It is in the movements like the Rastafarians with its critique of materialistic and consumerist world. And what he does by bringing together folk culture that has very clear African links, like in the figure of Anansi, or when you're looking at the Rastafarians who are also linked to the idea of a black world, a pan-black identity, and thinking of Africa as home, as Zion, okay, so that he's seeking his roots, that he's shaping his identity. And we will look forward now to his new works, to his experiments with style and language. And this is what we have. I want you to notice this. He calls it videolectics, or many people call it videolectics. What happened was a period of what he calls, a time of salt. He lost his wife, and then there was hurricane which destroyed his home and his archives, and then there was a break-in in his house in 1990, which resulted in his being shot by a gun at his head, but he did not die because the chamber was empty, but he felt the bullet passing through, felt that he had died and come back. So after that experience, you have what you call, psychorax videolectics. And the word that you have to really focus on is psychorax. And I want you to look at this. What I want you to look at is how he uses fontage, how he uses different styles, of typesets to actually write his poetry. What does it do? So notice this. I remember coughing and thinking. I also want you to notice the vanishing of the G at the end of coughing, not that, coughing and thinking. See, come no farther. Father is F-A-T-H-E-R, but F-A-R-T-H-E-R also. Look at the phonetics, okay? And that, why do you call it videolectics is also because notice that the font size changes, as if when you are speaking lines which are more bold, you are going to be, more emphatic. And when you are looking at smaller lines with a smaller font, you are going to be more calm. So it almost seems to give, if one could call it, a kind of a sign of how you must speak it. And the rhythm, which is very clearly there in this. It is not like the pentameter. It is not like English poetry. It is something which is entirely different. So he's taking his nation language one step further. And look at this one. And this one's very important. Before it dry up flaky and crink like you was painting your house. And notice the U, not Y-O-U, Y-U. Notice the use of the X as if it is a brush stroke. Okay, and notice the vanishings completely of the G's, but them sitting down there in such silence a room. Okay, so you notice how the rhythm of the language changes, the beat of the language changes. It goes into what you are going to call the riff, in guitar, or you're going to see the drum beat in reggae, or in ska music, or in dub music. So what is happening here? Okay, he is creating now a new groundbreaking poetics. And I use the title The Griot here. The Griot is a figure who is both the carver of wood and the singer of songs. And what he says, Brathwaite, I think the oral traditions do have a very strong visual aspect. Really, what I'm trying to do is create word sculptures on the page, but word song for the ear. So on the one hand, you have, a poetics which is new. On the one hand, you have, visual images, as we saw here and here. And on the other hand, you have, the sounds that are different. So as he says, he used the computer actually then, and he calls the computer psychorax. So why psychorax? And what is the relation of psychorax? I don't know how many of you know or remember or know this, but the figure of psychorax and Caliban and Prospero comes from Shakespeare's The Tempest. Okay? And when he uses a computer to visualize his dreams, to fontage, to use different fonts and typefaces to indicate different tonalities, he is rebelling against Prospero's poetry. Prospero's poetry is the poetry of colonizers. It is defined by the pentameter, which is the standard meter. It uses standard English, and it can lead to standardization of thought. In an absolutely fascinating, if I could call it, video where he gives a lecture, okay, he stands over there and says, what is the beat of the parade? And what is the beat of you when you are in the streets or when you are dancing? And how the parade beat with its typical, drum beat that tells you left, right, is also something that standardizes you and constricts you. So he is rebelling against what he calls Prospero's poetry, because Prospero is a colonizer. The man who goes from Europe, enters in Ireland, controls it, and silences Sycorax as a wicked woman. Okay, silences her, smothers her, bans her. She is an absence. And Caliban, her son, is taught the language of Prospero. And now these various Calibans, Caliban, ban, as he says in another poem, and as Shakespeare also gives him to sing, curses. Caliban says, you have taught me the language and I shall curse you. Okay, but the whole idea is that now they seek their own voice. And that is what he's trying to do, the griot. The griot, who is not only the carver of wood, so the visuality of it, but the singer of songs, the rhythms of it. And the griot is also the figure who will sit, light the fire and get the community together. And the community comes together, and shares the stories that has been there since the time of Anansi. It is in the poem Anansi that towards the end you see the figure of the griot as he sits over there, okay, and the people gather and the wood burns and the fire is a fire of life and the fire of rebellion and the fire of assertion and the fire of the self that you bring together. These are many Calibans seeking their language. And here, notice this. This is the letter Sycorax. And notice the different kinds of, again, fonts. Dear Mama, I writing you this letter, wa? Guess what? Pun a computer, okay? So pun a computer, pawn upon a computer. The upon becomes pun a computer, okay? Okay, so the break that is, there, like I join the mercantilists. The mercantilists, the merchants. Well, not quite. If you can beat Prospero, whistle. And notice this, if you can beat Prospero. But notice the language. Notice the language changing. This is nation language. So today we will do Angel Engine. It was published in Mother Poem, 1977, the first volume of Brathwaite's next trilogy, Ancestors. The other two volumes were Sun Poem, written in 1982, and Ex-Self, 1987. Ancestors, interestingly for you and me, was remediated in 2001. Okay, not the first volume that came, but it was, he remediated it, he relooked at it, and then he changed the style and the form, and he made it into a videolectic text. Mother Poem comprises of 25 poems. And if you will notice, Mother, the feminine, and the Sun Poem will look at the father figure, and the ex-self. Okay, and that's very interesting because it is the self which emerges out of these crossroads, out of literally the sea, in which you move, and the sun as it, rises and sets both in the day and in the zodiac. So the two elemental aspects, the sea, the earth, and the sun, and the self arises out of it. So what we have in the Mother Poem is 25 poems. My mother Barbados, is the setting and the central character. The mother is the native land, and she is set in a mothering sea. So notice how the land and sea merge into one another, not opposites, but really part of a larger continuum. And the mythic frame, explores both the human, that is the figures who are human, and the geological. And the sun in the Sun Poem is the father figure. The volume focuses on women and their relationship with men. It is about the women in the world, the human figures in Barbados. And Angel Engine is the final section of the mother poem named Comfort, the fourth section, which is coined from the Haitian Creole word hamfor for temple. So what is it that you have in Angel Engine? And I want you to notice the title itself. Angel, which seems to be divine, engine, which seems to be man-made, angel, which is associated definitely with the Christian world, engine with modernity, and yet it is angel/engine. And it is a very interesting intersection of modernity and the indigenous world, past and present, African roots and contemporary Caribbean. And this is what you need to understand. What is he doing really now? In a decade later from his first trilogy, he is still reasserting the African roots, the past, the indigenous world. And at the same time, you are living in the contemporary world, in the modern world. So how these two intersect? Really, again, like Anansi, when you go back to Legba, the god of the gateways. And how does this affect ordinary people? Because I think this is here that you're really going to look at the poem as very, very interesting. So the Yoruba deities, Shango and Ogun, are worshipped in the chants of the poem. Shango is a god of thunderbolts and lightning. Ogun is a Yoruba deity of war, iron and metallic instruments. Together they form one powerful force of fire and iron and lightning and metal. And it is interesting, that you are looking at them present in the world or around, in the trains, in the kind of tracks that we have in which you exist. And also remember that why is he even bringing Shango and Ogun or even Anansi? You will notice, and this is across texts in the post-colonial African world, in the colonial African world. I'm using post now as after the colonial after the colonial intrusion. The colonial representation or the European representation of Africa is that of savage, barbaric, and dark. They have no history, they need civilizing. In fact, even in Trinidad and Barbados, in Jamaica and Barbados and other places, legislations were passed against Shango worship, which anyway continued more underground. These are not things that were there in the public domain, but it happened, it was there. And what you also have to realize, so when you're going to read Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and when you're going to, look at the trial of Dedan Kimathi, you will notice over there how, the blacks were looked at and their resistance was looked at as savage. But what do you have in, say, blood oaths or in, the worship of, say, a Yoruba deity of war like Ogun are points of political resistance. And the space of worship in the poem is a chapel, a very simple one, which is really a shanty town kind of a thing. And the merging of the Christian and African forms of worship is suggested in similar patterns of address, as you will notice in the poem. So you will have praise be, and then the speaker over there can't say God, so she says and then later on it is sh, but she can't speak the names. But the praise be, and the congregation getting together is so important. The mother poem also focuses on women and their relationships, and that is a theme, and their relationship to men, husbands, parsons, debt collectors, overseers, men of aggression, men who exploit, broken and distorted by colonialism. Women survive, but not without a cost. So the themes are basically of the womanist experience, as you will also find in Color Purple, so that in the novel Color Purple. So they are survivors. And the text critiques and describes the condition of women's lives, the sexual exploitation, the unwed motherhood, a daughter who is sitting on a chair, rocking herself, her hands by her side, as a mother says, as far as I know, she too could be dead. And where is the solace? Where is the escape? Or where is any kind of hope? It is probably in worship, because nothing around you gives you hope. So the chants of the preacher and the congregation of marginalized, underprivileged people get together and they sing, and that is what we call in the poem. You will notice the crick crack, which is again goes back to Anansi, the poem that we have done, and the text of that, and it is exactly like that. So it was crick, and then you reply crack. So it is in that rhythm that is there, that is said in the text, that you will also have, the preacher and the congregation. But the figure, the central figure of the woman, who has suffered so much, who has no man in her life. The men who have come have only destroyed them. The overseer, the daughter who is clearly, raped. So she is unable to call out, praise be to Gigi, but she can't say God. And what is described then is the guilt she feels. Should she not? I mean, what is it? And it is physically manifested in her body when she feels haunted by a presence, and the presence is red, and the presence is it a cook? She doesn't know who it is, and she feels that she should shut it out. And there are a series of images that are going to be linked by sounds, within the text, that becomes very, very interesting. And these images are not linked by logic at all. Okay, they are just linked by sounds that she hears and things that she feels. But at the end of it all, she feels possessed, And this whole thing about possession, which is part of a lot of native cultures, even in India, and that you're possessed by the goddess, or that in the African world, clearly emerges at the end, as the text ends with an interweave of Gigi, Gaga, and Sha, God and Shango. Shang. Okay, praise be Shang, praise be Sha. And she can't say anything else after that. And the poem ends with the coming of the train in the rain. It is a style which is so important. And we see over here the continuum between written and oral poetry, between uninflected English and Creole. The poem begins very clearly, in what is uninflected English, the description of the space, the house, etc. But as you move, there is a shift. And by the sixth stanza of part 1, you already have something entirely different. Okay, you have the coming into Creole. So it moves. And again, there is a primacy of sound. You cannot, if you just read the poem, and I don't have the time to read it just now, otherwise I would read the poem, then you will have what we call the environmental experience. As one point, you're looking at, a Brathwaite saying, the thunder doesn't roar in, or the hurricane doesn't roar in a pentameter. So the environmental experience of the Caribbean landscape, world, culture, how does it come about? By changing the rhythms and breaking with traditional Western meter. So there are short, unequal lines, not syntactically defined, and just look at it, I put it there, and it's spin in round and it's stagger in down. Okay, so the G has gone, and very clearly there is a change in spelling. You will notice rhythm, R-I-D-D-I-M for rhythm, W-D wood for wood, and DE is a form in nation language. Dem for them, day for day. Emphasis on the spoken rhythm and native inflection is there. The next poem that I'm going to race through now is going to be Stone. Okay, I have here in this particular slide talked about Mikey Smith, the musician with a working class background who performed dub music, who was stoned to death for questioning a minister at public gathering by 4 men as he walked walked down the road in the morning. And his poem, that is available on YouTube is something for which you must actually just see. And see Michael Smith's, again notice the type, the typeface over here. Stone is a powerful poem on the death of Mikey Smith. He was stoned by fellow Jamaicans. And very importantly, one can see him as a symbol of other silencings, by imposition restrictions on publications or censorship, but more often by death, murder or suicide. So he's a victim of history, and he's a historical victim. What is more important for us is to see the connection between Brathwaite and Mikey Smith. They knew each other. There is a personal, artistic, in terms of poetry, language, the use of native rhythms, spoken rhythms, drum beats, and reggae. They are both poet performers. And the narrative voice of the poem, it's such a powerful poem that I would advise you to read it very slowly, once, twice, 3 times. And you see that the narrative voice is Mikey's in his dying moments. A response to the moment, locating it in the space of Stony Hill. And the rest of it is completely interiorized. It is his feelings at that moment that come in. And what you have is flashes of the past, and clapping and clapping and clapping. The clapping that he had got in England, in Toronto, at the UNESCO, juxtaposed with now, this moment, not a soul on Stony Hill to even say amen. A description of blood flowing on the earth. The fences began to crack in my skull. Dreadlocks were in fire. And the dry gully where my teeth used to be, head and dead, belly bleeding dub, the heavy flux of blood in my veins. And these dying moments are juxtaposed with the blue of peace filling up heavens. And the peace of nature slipping past me into the root I was, with splashes that my breathing made when it was howl and red and bubble. So the bleeding and the peace, both, are juxtaposed together as part of his dying experience. Stone is a personal involvement for Brathwaite, not only because he knew, but Walcott, Brathwaite, and other poets like Lamings. They saw the violence as an object of human influence, used to silence, vicious, destructive death-giving. And yet, out of that, they are going to see, that it doesn't die. At the end, a juxtaposition of the natural world and man. The inevitability of what happens. I could not hold it back or roll it from me into memory. How would one think of the last time? I am the stone that killed me. So, the scale and associations, notice the links also with Brathwaite, and personally as well as in the poem, the use of nation language, the I word, I chest, I belly, the F reference to Rastafari, also in the reference to dreadlocks. It captures the singing style of Mikey Smith, and please hear him. Today you hear of rap music, Indian rap music, but it all began in Jamaica, in the West Indies, and then spread out to the world. And look at this, Lord, murderer. He captures, and Mikey Smith had one of the loudest, the most, he could hold his breath for a long time and sing it out. So, he captures it in the lines. And the inclusion of sound effects of performative poetry is a tribute to Mikey Smith. The reference to Marcus Garvey, the idea of Black solidarity, of Caribbean identity. But most significantly, it is a solidarity of artists, writers, and performers asserting a new Caribbean identity. Most significantly, through art and poetry and music and technology, the attempts to silence fail. Words and music live on. This stone, the poem, is the memorialization of the dying moments of Mikey Smith, but also a memory that will live forever. Thank you.